What's the journey that I want to take the person through? Here's where I started, here's where I'm going to get. Here's where you are, here's where you're going to get this result, this thing. And I'm going to take them through this journey. But what are the steps to get there? Because keep in mind, every time you're building a presentation or when I get up and I speak, I almost think of it like if what I was saying got transcribed into a book, would it flow and would it make sense? So think of it that they're listening like they're reading a book. So you got to tell the story, the origin, where is it? Then you've got to move them into this is what I learned from that experience. Here's what I applied, etc. So start to map that out. What's the flow of the journey you're going to take this person on? Man, I hear this all the time. Hey, Chaz, I really want to start speaking in front of people. Like, how did you get your start? Or what could I do to get in front of people to start this public speaking? I want to be on stages, or I want to do workshops, or I want to do events. Like, I hear this all the time. So let me give you some quick steps you can do to start your public speaking career. Number one, the first thing to prep is a topic. And I'm going to share with you something that's really hard to hear for people who want to start speaking. And in fact, it was probably one of the first things my mentor and coach said to me. And it was something to the effect of this, like, why should I listen to you? What is something that you have that I should pay attention to? You know, so many people think that they just get on stage and they're going to tell a story, but you've got to have something compelling, some reason I should stop what I'm doing and listen to you. What is that? Now, it's also not as hard as you think. You've probably done something that you've accomplished, right? That's worth talking about, something you've overcome, something you're an expert in, something you could teach others. I mean, there's lots of topics that you could list out. So what I would do is I would get a whiteboard and just start listing those out. Again, what's something I'm an expert in? What's something I've accomplished? What's something I've overcome? What's something I could teach others? I mean, I've seen people literally learn a skill set. Like there was a guy I heard one time, he recently became a vegan, and he's like, he couldn't find really good vegan recipes. So he self-taught and he learned all this stuff. And over a year, he had a way to create some really simple, easy recipes to be a vegan. So what did he do? He went and created an event that people came to learn how to create and make vegan recipes. Like because he learned it, quote, he was an expert and now he could teach others. Again, I know people who, maybe they've lost everything, or they were in prison, or business failed, or a marriage failed, or they lost somebody in life and they overcame this great tragedy, this thing, and they were able to talk about that. So first thing is list all the topics. Like stop yourself, like, whoa, am I really an expert at that? Just brain dump, put them up on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper, like all the topics you could talk about. The next thing, and this one's really powerful, especially if you want a long career in speaking and teaching and talking to others. And if you want to know why this is so important as well, go back to a video I did, which we'll put the link in here, to the 4 levels of value that Myron Golden talks about, because communication is one of the highest paying levels of value. And that's why this is so important. One of the things that we do is we create a story inventory. And so when you have your topics, next to those topics, you're going to break out and create a story inventory. So for example, I talk about overcoming some really hard things in business, and I have 4 or 5 stories that I tell all the time. And what we do is we create a spreadsheet of these stories. So it'll have the topic of the story, or the main idea of the story. What sort of business discipline does that fall under, or what principle am I teaching in that story? And then the last column is like, here's a link or to a video of it where I've told it before, or where it's written down somewhere so we always know where that story is. And this story inventory, you don't have to have a lot of them. Start with 1, start with 2. And as you start to create these over time, and in fact, here's a little tip, they don't always even have to be your stories, right? You can hear a great story and I'll put it in my inventory, but I'll give credit to who told the story and whose it is, because that's important when you're telling stories. You got to give credit where credit's due. So have this story inventory that you're building, because it's going to help support the topics. That's the second step. Now, third, once I have a topic and I've got maybe a story or 2, I'll start to map out the principles or the disciplines or the topics that I'm going to talk about within this main overarching topic or principle that I'm trying to get across. And I start to build a flow. What's the journey that I want to take the person through? Here's where I started, here's where I'm going to get. Here's where you are, here's where you're going to get this result, this thing. And I'm going to take them through this journey. But what are the steps to get there? Because keep in mind, every time you're building a presentation, or when I get up and I speak, I almost think of it like if what I was saying got transcribed into a book, would it flow and would it make sense? So think of it that they're listening like they're reading a book. So you got to tell the story, the origin, where is it? Then you've got to move them into this is what I learned from that experience. Here's what I applied, etc. So start to map that out. What's the flow of the journey you're going to take this person on? Because it's not so much that they have to trust that you know everything you're talking about. They have to believe that it can work for them, or that they can overcome, or, if you're talking about being an expert, that they can actually do the thing you're teaching them. So now create the flow that you're gonna set for your presentation. All right, the next step that I do, once I have the flow, I start to create some images or PowerPoints. So for me, it's really simple. I'll actually just draw out, or I have saved squares, just simple squares, and I'll write maybe the topic or the flow or what image I want in those, right? And if you want to create your own PowerPoint, you can, or you can send it out to somebody, to a service like Fiverr.com. For a few dollars, you can have somebody create a PowerPoint for you, and you can now have some images or PowerPoint that's there in front of you. Now, just a little speaker tip. Some people do really well with PowerPoint. I, on the other hand, do not. I think PowerPoint sometimes traps me in to having to talk exactly what I put on that PowerPoint, and it doesn't allow me to feel the audience or pivot on any question or topic depending on the way that I'm presenting. So use it carefully. You see presenters who rely way too much on PowerPoint. If you're gonna use it, again, another strong tip is use more images than text. There's nothing worse than sitting there, somebody's got a bunch of text on the screen and they're just reading it to you. So make sure that if you're gonna create a PowerPoint or something like that, you have a ton of visuals. The next step is now you practice. Practice with somebody, practice with a free audience, practice as many times as you possibly can, giving the presentation. Even as skilled a presenter as I've been, or opportunities, I still find time to practice. I think of one opportunity I had last year. I prepared this keynote. I thought I had it really dialed in, and I presented it in a brief way to a few members and a few people in my staff and my team. And several of them said, yeah, it was really good, but have you considered this? Or could you change the way these principles are? Because they sound more like kind of like a know-it-all on these principles, but how could you rephrase them to turn it around to say, oh, this is how I could do it? And in fact, those simple edits changed the entire way the audience felt about that presentation. I'm glad I spent the time to practice. I'm glad I got some feedback before I got on stage and presented that. So these are some simple steps that can help you get your speaking career off the ground, at least from a presentation standpoint. There are lots of opportunities to get in front of audiences. Once you've created a presentation and you want to get in front of an audience, everyone wants to charge big fees and command big fees to get on stage. That will come over time. The best thing you can do is get in front of people and tell your story and do your presentation, because events want powerful speakers, and not just speakers, but they want the audience to have an experience. And if you can take the audience through an experience, I promise you, you'll only need to get on stage one time and you'll get invited back and you'll get invited to other events. But unless you've gone through this process of creating a powerful presentation, you won't get that opportunity. Hey, if this was helpful, go ahead and like and subscribe and share this out with somebody who's looking to get a speaking career off the ground.